Well, good morning, everyone. All right, we've got a packed day, so I'm going to try to kick this off at the appointed time. My name is Joe Thomas, and I have the honor and privilege to serve as the director of the Vice Admiral James B. Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership here at the Naval Academy. I'll spare everyone kind of the introductions of the team and so on. I'll defer that to Colonel McDonough to give some thanks and to do some acknowledgments. But I thought it'd be helpful because as I look out in the audience, I see a lot of longtime supporters, longtime friends of the Stockdale Center as well as the Naval Academy. I see a lot of people that have been here to the McCain conference year after year for a very, very long time. But I'm also aware that there's a lot of new faces here visiting Annapolis for the first time, visiting this conference for the first time, and certainly a lot of midshipmen and cadets I see as well in the audience. So I thought maybe just for a moment, I'd set things up with a little bit of context about the center, about how this conversation began many, many years ago. Now, it's often been said that the Stockdale Center serves as the internal think tank of the Naval Academy. And in the mission statement of the Stockdale Center, there's an up and out flavor that goes back to the very origins when it was stood up initially, not as the Stockdale Center, but as the Center for the Study of Professional Military Ethics in 1998. And that up and out mission was expressed as the center was to serve as a beacon for the nation. And as a result, then and today, there's a great deal of time spent in direct support of the larger Navy, the Marine Corps, other parts of DOD, as well as other government agencies, and even centers of national influence is in that original charter of the Stockdale Center. And beyond that, support of international organizations such as NATO. And in the process of that up and out mission, we've been in the business of producing curriculum, support for ethics, leadership, character development, writing that curriculum, and then ultimately delivering. The team is usually engaged throughout the year in delivering a lot of that curriculum on behalf, for example, of NATO's Partnership for Peace program across Eastern Europe, former Soviet republics, Sub-Saharan Africa, places like that. So up and out has been a key from the very beginning. The other aspect of this internal think tank is focused down and in. And those are the various things that we do in support of the Brigade of Midshipmen and other cost centers across the yard. And it's a pretty broad spectrum of things. And part of the reason I point this out to you is we're going to try to, as well as put some really phenomenal speakers. I think you'll all agree when you look at the lineup of speakers, kind of nationally, internationally known speakers with true subject matter expertise and character. But we're going to put panels together as well, cross-sections of different perspectives on this idea of assessing and developing character. Right? So that's what we do. This is in many ways the heavy lift that's done by our ethics research effort led by Dr. Ed Barrett, our Director of Research, Ethics Research, and our distinguished Chair of Ethics, Dr. David Luban. But in the effort of up and down, or up and out and down and in, some of the things that you'll have access to while you're here, and I strongly encourage you to take advantage of, is we've developed over the course of time some 250 plus podcasts, for example, for consumption for folks well beyond the Naval Academy. We've created immersive scenarios, kind of case studies 2.0. For use with smartphones that kind of draw you in graphic novel format, a large number of those and a growing number of those that we serve up on stockdalecenter.com for use for the various organizations and institutions that are represented here today. And we do special projects. For example, this past year we commemorated the 50th anniversary of the repatriation of the Vietnam War POWs from Hoa Lo, or the Hanoi Hilton, which kind of culminated in a nationally televised movie that we did called POW Passing on Wisdom, which took the lessons of the POWs and overlaid those lessons on how we plow this back into the benefit of the Naval Academy. So it's a dual story, POWs, current day midshipmen, and how we draw lessons of honor, integrity, resilience, and so on. Now, when it comes to the down and in, I'd like to think that the Naval Academy, through its generous philanthropic supporters, has enabled us to invest in our staff, faculty, and coaches in ways and to levels well over $1 million, for example, invested in the abilities of our staff, faculty, and coaches, not in their narrow area of expertise. That's an investment by other parts of the Naval Academy, but rather investing in them as developers themselves of future leaders. There aren't many other universities investing to the degree with the resources that we are fortunately given by our supporters to get everybody, coaches, faculty members alike, to think of themselves, in some sense, first and foremost as leader developers. So that's a unique aspect of what we do. And in the process of that, in the Down and In mission, we partner with various parts of the Naval Academy. Every cost center, in one way or another, is kind of touched by the Stockdale Center team. And I have to say, on that point, there's no greater partnership in the Down and In mission here than the partnership that we share with the Commandant's cost center. I've been here about 20 years now in a couple of different capacities at the Naval Academy, so I've seen a lot of commandants during that time. It's been my honor to work with some really great commandants over that span. But I have to say that the 89th Commandant of Midshipmen, Colonel J.P. McDonough, is among the very best, if not the very best that I've seen. Over the course of the past 2 years, he's made investments that have actually given meaning to this idea of empowering the brigade. It's easy to say those types of things, but over the course of the past 2 years, he's made investments, he's done things that have truly empowered the brigade. Culminating, I think, in many ways, your most recent effort of publishing this, the ethos, midshipman ethos, and ensuring that kind of bubbles up from the midshipmen themselves, which is the best way to do it. So it's with that said, with that context behind us, and with Colonel McDonough before us, I'd like to introduce to you the 89th Commandant of Midshipmen, Colonel J.P. McDonough.
Dr. Thomas, thanks for those kind words. I think he was trying to throw me off my game with that a little bit. It's all right. It's what Marines do to each other. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Vice Admiral Sean Buck, the Superintendent of the Naval Academy, I welcome you here to the McCain Conference in Annapolis, Maryland, along the lovely banks of the Severn in beautiful spring with the cherry blossoms blooming. My name, as mentioned, is Colonel J.P. McDonough, and I am the Commandant of Midshipmen. In that role, I am charged with developing the character and leader abilities of our midshipmen from I-Day to graduation, and then commissioning them as Navy and Marine Corps officers. As I look through the topics of this conference titled Moral Character, Development, and Assessment, and the list of attendees and speakers, I am truly excited about what will be discussed and the collaboration that will occur. We have participating faculty from all service academies and intermediate and senior level military schools, thought leaders from civilian universities, think tanks, industry, and government. Our own midshipmen and some West Point cadets, welcome south here, as well as foreign guests from the UK Royal Navy and Royal Marines, as well as the Israeli Defense Force. Welcome to you all. Here at the Naval Academy, we are steeped in tradition. And you may hear an older alumni here visiting for a reunion say something along the lines of, when I was here, we, and then fill in the blank, and it worked for me, and see how good I turned out. And I've been often the subject of that conversation. And to be clear, and I want to be absolutely clear when I say this, our legacy of combat-proven leaders in the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the early Air Force is impressive and something we work to uphold. We talk a lot about legacy here. But I also ask is, what have we learned in the last 20 or 30 years? Here at this conference, we will address some of those questions. Tradition is absolutely important, as I mentioned, to this institution, but we also must critically examine how we do things, such as character and moral development. All the incredible research is occurring across industry, academia, and the military should inform our methods of teaching and doing, both for the faculty and staff to model and to teach the midshipmen. Over the last 2 years, I have seen the challenges we face as we come out of COVID and with an ever-changing society around us. I have learned that it is wrong to assume that everyone who arrives here on I-Day has the same moral base. We must start at the most basic level and build character from the ground up. The nearly 2 years of lost face-to-face personal interactions have put our folks at a developmental deficit. Whether that time was here or for the junior classes or the classes about to come in high school. But I also see the time is now as an opportunity for change, where we need to incorporate the latest research to address those shortcomings in new and much-needed ways. As they say, let no crisis go to waste. When I provided my commandant's intent to the brigade, my number one task was and is, can you help me out? It's what? Character above all else. And every single day, that is validated with my interaction with midshipmen. Character above all else. That is the baseline. As I look at some of the questions to be discussed over the next 2 days, such as how should moral character be developed, sustained, and recovered? How should virtues be assessed? How should developmental programs be assessed? I am truly excited. These are hard questions. Luckily, we have all of you to help us answer them. So I look forward to seeing this great agenda unfold over the next 2 days. But just importantly, this should lead to continued collaboration when you leave here, to ensure we learn from each other and raise the bar across all of our institutions when it comes to moral character development. So I just want to say thanks to Dr. Thomas and the entire team who put this together. Truly a great agenda, and I think, you know, as we fill this room up, everyone is excited to hear what is said today and tomorrow. So I'll now turn it over to Lieutenant General Whistler, Distinguished Chair of Leadership for the Stockdale Center, to introduce our keynote speaker. Thanks, and look forward to the next 2 days.
Thanks, Colonel McDonough. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm now going to embark on about a 45-minute introduction of, just kidding. If you need me to tell you about General Mattis, you shouldn't be in this audience. So if you don't know anything about him, please get up and leave. We have other people who want seats. General John A. Lejeune, 13th Commandant of the Marine Corps, said, leadership is the sum of those qualities of intellect, human understanding, and moral character that enables a person to inspire and control a group of people successfully. I think, boiled down after my time on active duty and the time since studying leadership, what General Lejeune meant in sort of plain words for me is leadership is the sum of those qualities of competence, compassion, and courage that enable someone to inspire people to go to places they can't or won't go on their own. I can think of no individual, certainly in my career, and I would offer that I've engaged over my lifetime, that embodies that more than our keynote speaker today. So without any further ado, I introduce to you General James N. Mattis, General, United States Marine Corps, retired.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you, General Whistler. I still remember you as Second Lieutenant Whistler when I was a captain, and I will not tell the mids about those times for obvious reasons. But ladies and gentlemen, it's good to be back at Annapolis. I turned down 95%, 98% of requests to speak. I will never turn down the U.S. Naval Academy, I assure you. Having come into the Marine Corps, I would just say encouraged by the draft. Would be a polite way of putting it. My Army buddies say I was not the brightest draft dodger in town. I joined the Marine Infantry to get out of the Army. But no regrets at all on that. Just to close the gap between an old gray-haired general and you young mids, especially, that's where I direct my remarks today. I'll talk for just a couple minutes, and then Midshipman Booker is going to waterboard me in front of all of you and get the truth out of me. But I look forward to that because when you get to my age and my color hair, it's hard to explain just how devoted we are to try and help you young folks grow up in the naval service and be ready for the challenges that we can anticipate you're going to get, and even those we cannot anticipate. And in that regard, character development and trust are irretrievably linked. You cannot pull them apart. You cannot retrieve them separate from each other. And so a lot of the talk that you're going to hear, I assume for the next, throughout the conference, next couple hours and all, is going to be about how you build trust. Because without trust, you cannot have the confidence inside the military that you need to support and defend this Constitution. These are free citizens who come in and voluntarily make themselves obedient to your orders. And it is impossible to have that sort of happy crew, the kind of crew that will move swiftly and with a lot of confidence against the enemy, if you do not have a crew that believes in each other, has trust in each other. We say oftentimes in the military, operations happen at the speed of trust. And what you're really saying at that point is that character is absolutely critical. And I have it brought home to me. When I was young, there was a rock and roll song. Nowadays, you'd have to listen to NPR radio to hear it. It's kind of old-timey thing. But there was a line in it that I never fully understood, but it somehow stuck with me for reasons I can't remember. And it said, "You, when you're on the road, must have a code that you can live by." And I bring that up because looking back over the years of duty and dishonor, of intelligence and stupidity and all the things that you will find as you go through your adult world, you've got to have something you hang on to. And that code that you hang on to will either make you a better version of yourself, or it will enable you to certainly make better versions of others by your demonstrated leadership. But both are built on the trust that you can create inside your own unit and inside your own ship's crew or whatever it is that makes people just pretty much abandon the sense of survival, to put it bluntly. They want to live, they're going to do everything they can to live, but they're also going to put their lives on the line, signing that blank check to the American people that says that they're going to go in harm's way based on that trust that they have in our government, in our society and all. And that trust right now is going through some tough times. And so your example by being here sends a message far beyond your personal role here, getting through EE and everything else that you've got to get through. It also sends a message to the American people that this great big American dream does exist. We're not a racist country. We're not a misogynist country. We actually can listen to what Lincoln called our better angels. And out of that, you're going to create a force that is feared by our enemies and is trusted by our allies. There's a saying I heard among British troops when I was serving with them. They said that an officer can trust their wallet, their wife, and their life to their fellow officers. You can see the trust that right away comes in to the kind of people who can nod to each other, knowing when they cross the line of departure, we're all going to be there together. They will literally trust you with everything that's dear to them. And I bring it up because I also had brought home to me, because there are expectations of every one of you when you get to the fleet, and that's where you're going. And those expectations can also be expectations that are pretty harsh, because the Naval Service is the varsity. They make no apology for that. And I was sitting in a board on one occasion where we're selecting officers for promotion. And I was the junior guy in the room, called the recorder. And I'm watching these 11 officers, and they're briefing various officers' packages. One of the officers' packages was briefed, and an officer at the end of it said, "I need to say something here. I do not trust this man. He is competent beyond belief in his military occupational specialty. He's very good at what he does. I do not trust him. I have a specific reason to doubt his integrity and his ethics." The president looked around the room for a minute, said, "Anything else?" And no one said anything. He looked over at me and said, "Turn on the voting machine." And we voted right then. We didn't wait till the end. Usually you brief all the officers. We voted right then, 11-0, he was out. I bring that up because the Naval Service is not going to accept anything less than ethical performance. Now, Midshipman Booker and I are going to go back and forth here because I don't like giving long talks. But by the time we're done, I hope that you have a better appreciation for what I learned along the way. So let's get on with it, Midshipman, and let's have some fun here.
Alrighty. Good morning, everyone. My name is Midshipman First Class Grant Booker. I'm a senior here in the 9th Company. and I have the honor of being the moderator for this portion of the conference today. So, sir, just rolling right into it. See up here, top of the screen, we've got the words moral character, but these can be kind of abstract concepts at times. In your estimation, how would you define moral character? What is it, at its core?
Moral character right away means you're going to do what you say you're going to do. I still remember when I got handed my rifle. I'm 18 years old down here at Quantico. Got handed my rifle by a corporal who said the same thing to every one of us going through the line. He said, "This is the rifle. This is why you now exist, and never point it at anyone unless you intend to pull the trigger." He was right away giving us an ethics lesson, which is you live up to your word. If you're going to point at someone, you pull the trigger, but don't point it if you don't mean to. In its own way, the character development and what the characteristics you see up here on the board to moral character are, I thought, very good as I got ready for this talk. These are the kind of things that allow you to gain the trust of others. And frankly, your personal development in these areas, your moral character, that's going to serve as your passport to the trust of everyone else, to the American people, to the naval service, to the troops beneath you who look to you as their role model, as their example. This is what you have to aim for more than anything else. The Navy, the Marine Corps, they will train you what you need to know. They're very good at that. We'll educate you to what we don't know is coming so that you know how to deal with that when it comes. But developing your moral character is your responsibility. And I think that as you develop it and you flesh it out and you stay authentic to yourself, but you're marrying your naval tribe, you'll also become a better version of yourself and able to create in your troops better versions of themselves. But it's purposeful. It doesn't just happen. It's not like it's just osmosis where if you come through the Naval Academy, it automatically comes in. You really got to work at it. But what does it mean years later? I'm out there on the West Coast now is where I spend most of my time. And I was given a talk one day at a yacht club, believe it or not. And I was there, went down and talked to the guy who ran all the docks, all the berthing spots for the sailboats and all. And I just asked him who he hires for the job. He was telling me how they did it. He took a lot of pride in his work. He said, here in San Diego, he says, I hire 4-year Navy men. I said, why? Why do you pick them? He said, because I can trust them. Now, here's a guy who's never served in the military, and he's already learned through hiring and firing, an old man now, he knows who has the moral character to do what he wants done. It's a small statement, but just think how many organizations in the country can say there's people who look for their people, their graduates, their long service people. He said 4 years a Navy man. He said, I'll take them any day of the week. How many organizations have that reputation? And it's because of this. It's not because they once sailed the 7 seas. It's because of this up here.
So, sir, you talked about, when you were at the podium, the trust between officers. You talked about how the guy at the yacht club, he was able to trust Navy service members. Most of the people in this room today are in uniform. Not everybody, but the vast majority of people in here are in some form of green or black uniform today. Do you think that the virtues of a soldier or a Marine, a sailor, do you think they differ from those of a civilian, or do you think it's all the same, but we have it to a greater degree?
Well, the naval service, especially at a young age, will take the veneer off you faster than just about any challenge in your life. Due to the nature of the naval service, it has to give a lot of authority, a lot of decision-making in many, many cases to very junior officers. And so you're going to be exposed at a time when other people can hide in their organizations from making ethical decisions and that sort of thing. But I don't think it makes any difference whether you're a civilian or a military person. We're not special other than the fact that we took on the Patriots' obligation of defending the country. But we're not special in terms of being human beings. And I can't imagine any of the qualities that you see up here not helping you if you're a husband or wife, a mother or father, a member of a school board, in government, working for a corporation. What organization wouldn't want to see those qualities in their workforce? Probably one difference is, in terms of its practice, that you're going to be evaluated every day by subordinates who are going to be negotiating in their own mind, do I trust this officer or not? And I'm willing to go in harm's way based on the competence and the empathy of my junior officer above me. I mean, it's real good if the Chief of Naval Operations loves his sailors, and it's real good if the Commandant of the Marine Corps loves his Marines. But when you get down to the point of where it matters, what is the junior officer's force of personality, their persuasion, their competence? Are they really interested? Your sergeants in the Marine Corps will give you a lesson very quickly. And they'll say your troops don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Empathy is not a byproduct of character development. It's a direct result of having respect for others. And in that way, this is why so many corporations around the world are eager to grab graduates from Annapolis. They'll pay you an obscene amount of money to turn your back on the naval service when you get out, because they know what this Annapolis turns out. And so I don't think it's something that's unique. It's just something that the Navy and the Marine Corps rewards. And you should always remember that institutions get the behavior they reward. And because the Navy and the Marine Corps rewards moral development, moral character, then you become a much stronger member of your family, your school board, your parish, your diocese, your community. So I don't think it's different. I just think that you have an opportunity to learn a lot more about yourself as young men and women than most people will ever learn about themselves, because the veneer comes off in the naval service.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. And sir, Colonel McDonough, we talked about character above all else. I think that everybody in this room can kind of see the value of what the Naval Academy has done here in terms of developing that character, putting programs in. The majority of people in here are midshipmen. We have opportunities to hear from, call sign Chaos General Mattis. So I think everybody in here is definitely grateful for that. Everybody, I would say, just as human beings, we all have the best intentions with whatever we're doing. We all want to do the right thing. We all want to have moral character. But they say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and we're definitely going to make mistakes at some point. A lot of the time, mistakes and character flaws, a lack of discipline, they can look similar on the surface, but they have really different underlying root causes. What would you say, how can you distinguish between those two and those that you lead? And when those mistakes or lack of discipline instances occur, how would you say that you rectify those situations?
That is a big question because it's so multifaceted. I would just tell you that understanding the difference between a mistake and a lack of discipline is critical, because when I finally figured out by the time I was a first lieutenant that my troops really did not lay awake at night, my sailors and Marines, looking at the ceiling saying, now how can I screw up Lieutenant Mattis's day tomorrow? I kind of wondered at times, because of the number of times after a good Liberty call or something, I had my heels locked in front of my company commander because of my rambunctious young fellows. But the fact is, if you can distinguish between a mistake and a lack of discipline, you will deal with those two things very differently. Now, a lack of discipline is serious, and you cannot walk by that and not do something about it, because you just set a new standard if you do. It doesn't mean you have to court-martial everyone. I'll get into that. But you do have to be intolerant of a lack of discipline, because that is all the difference. I mean, take a look at the Russian troops on the battlefield today who lack discipline, and look what's happening, and you can read it in every headline. They're pathetic. And the discipline is what separates a mob from a disciplined force. But I think that what you find in mistakes is generally you need to look in the mirror yourself and say, what could I have done so that that mistake didn't happen? Almost always I found I could have been a better coach. And my role model for myself as a leader is player-coach. I want to know how to play the game, but I want to be able to coach my troops to be the best at that game. And so I got a lot better at crafting my personal commander's intent as the years went by, as I realized if I made very clear what I wanted, my aim, what I wanted to do, and very clear what the end state should look like, and if I'd put in the ideas about how I think it ought to be done without becoming so strict that I removed their chance for initiative, they made fewer and fewer mistakes. Now, a lack of discipline is different, and you've got to address it. And when you see it, you have to remember this, that it's a direct impact on us, the Naval Service, as a war-fighting outfit. It's not a politically correct thing, just forget all that stuff. It's about, can you discipline yourself to lead a disciplined life, a self-disciplined life? And what is the unit discipline level? It'll reflect what the junior officer expects. The junior officer, if they expect their troops are going to perform up to here and sets that example, that's where almost all of them are going to perform. If you expect they're a bunch of dirtbags and you perform down at that level yourself, you'll get that. The junior officer will set the tone for this sort of thing. When you have mistakes, I would just tell you that if you keep your troops running the ethical midfield, think of American football now, everyone makes mistakes at times. If they're running the ethical midfield, they'll recover. If they're running the sidelines, always trying to see what they can get away with, and they make a mistake, they're going to be out of bounds. And at that point, in the Naval Service, if you're out of bounds, and you're probably going to get drop kicked through the goalposts of life, because they don't tolerate that sort of thing, you know? But at the same time, keep your passion for excellence, including on ethics, balanced with your compassion for your troops. If it is just simply a mistake, and then the amount of time they had to make the decision at the rank and age they were at, if they did their best, then find a way to coach them to be better, walk them through vignettes, change your own training, that sort of thing. If it's an outright lack of discipline, you've got to do something about it. I remember once an officer had really disappointed me. It certainly, if he hadn't been a lieutenant, I probably would have been even harsher, but I took him on a run. And it was a hot day at 29 Palms, and I didn't say a word to him for 3 miles, which for a lieutenant and a full colonel, that's a rather uncomfortable silence. And then at that point, I started talking to him. By that point, he's gotten rid of all the excess energy, and he's probably in a listening mode, and basically I made it clear it would never happen again. And that's what you're really out to do with your leadership, is to ensure bad things don't happen again. They're going to happen sometimes. And sometimes you just have to bite the bullet, tell you the truth, and you have to be really blunt with your troops. But if you've been honest with them all along, you can speak bluntly to them, and they'll still have their receivers on. I had some young troops on one occasion in combat. I had about 23 battalions in this organization, and in combat, a bus had gone by that refused to stop, and the Marine had shot through the back of the bus, and you can imagine what happened to some innocent people on the bus. I needed every battalion in the fight. We were closing in on Baghdad, had to have them there, so I got the battalion together in a place that was out of artillery range, had them move there, and I got them into a group tighter than this. They were so close together, they were just squeezed in. The front ones were sitting down, the next ones were on their knee and then standing. There's 800 of them, and I just sat there looking at them for about 5 minutes. They knew what they'd done. And I looked at them and I said, "Gentlemen, this will never happen again. Do you understand me?" And they said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Okay, I'm going to look each one of you in the eye, and you keep looking at me." And I started over on the left, and I went all the way through. And if somebody wasn't looking, I'd say, "You, look at me." And it probably took me 10 minutes to look every one of them in the eye. Then I said, "We're not going to discuss this again. I need you back in the fight. And now it's over. Do you understand?" They said, "Yes." I said, "Now go do it." And I never had another ethical violation by that unit. You don't have to court-martial everyone, but you have to impose the ethical standards that have to be maintained. And if mistakes are made and they're of an ethical nature, you have to deal with it even then. And how you deal with it is up to you as an officer, as a gentlewoman or gentleman, and you handle it that way. And if you have to, I mean, just remember, even Jesus of Nazareth had 1 out of 12 go to crap on him, okay? I mean, it happened. And once in a while, you gotta drop kick them right on out. And I used to tell people, if you ever violate a prisoner, once he throws that rifle down, if you ever abuse that prisoner, I will be dry-eyed as I send you to Fort Leavenworth for the rest of your natural life. So make certain your troops know what you stand for, make sure they know what you will not stand for, but don't classify every single mistake as some legalistic, thing that's just got to be handled at the highest level. Can you get in trouble for the way you handle things? Sure you can. I had a couple guys, we had a very popular young Marine killed by an IED, and the Marines, in response to it, killed innocent people. Now, they didn't know what they were doing. They were throwing grenades into rooms and this sort of thing. And after 2 years, and after a congressman had called them cold-blooded murderers on national TV, I dismissed charges against several of those Marines after I looked at the amount of time they had and what knowledge they had at the moment. At that point in time, what I was removing, ladies and gentlemen, was a sense of unethical behavior by the chain of command that had 2 years, had 60 different investigators finding evidence on these guys, and congressmen on the national level condemning them. And then I turned around and I removed the charges and was immediately invited to Washington, D.C. to explain myself. I said, sure, I'll come and tell the congressman who's asking me to come. I told his staffer that I read over 9,000 pages of investigation over 7 months. And I'm sure he has too, and we'll have a real good discussion. And a few minutes later, they called and said, no, you don't need to come. And I said, okay. But my point to you is, you got to do the right thing, and sometimes the right thing is to bridle back against what the chain of command wants you to do. That's also ethics and restoring trust across your organization.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. So we kind of talked about seeing what happens after a mistake's been made, determining whether it was lack of character, lack of discipline, or just a simple mistake that people make. But that's kind of looking at it reactively. Just to look a little more proactively before you get to that point, how do you identify bad character in a person just based on the traits that you see before they actually mess up?
Well, usually remember, you're going to see the public image of someone, and they've got a private part of themselves. We all have that. And sometimes the public or the paper that you see written on a Marine is accurate, and sometimes what you see is not what you get. And so you have to be willing to accept that there are some out there that need more work. But that's your job as an officer. You're in local parentis for many of these young guys and gals. What I mean by that is, unless they had a teacher or they had a coach who really took interest in them, many of them come from home life that is not very conducive to stability or developing character and that sort of thing. So you've got to recognize your job is to develop that. It doesn't just happen. Think of the hours and the days that you've put in here at the academy and think, how about the person who comes straight out of high school? Maybe it's a middling high school that's not got the highest academic standards. Maybe didn't have the kind of teachers that showed a lot of interest. Now they're in the Marine Corps, the Navy. And so what you have to do is take it as your responsibility to develop this in your troops. And what you'll spot is usually selfishness. One of the primary reasons I stuck around this low-paying outfit, the Marine Corps, so long is because I learned at a young age I'd rather have crummy jobs, and believe me, by age 21, I knew how to hate a minefield like you wouldn't believe, and I still hate them to this day. But I loved being around the sailors and Marines who would crawl into that minefield and put themselves at risk to find the mines so that the others would not get hurt. When you're around a group like that, then you reward that kind of behavior, that kind of selfless behavior. Guess what? Not everyone is selfless. But if you bring it out in them, and how do you do that, then they will become the better persons they want to be. And you get it by rewarding them. And sometimes the reward is nothing more than at the morning quarters or the division muster or the platoon formation. The young officer just calls someone out and says, I saw this happen. I'll give you an example. I was walking behind a formation one day, and I heard a lieutenant saying that so-and-so had been sick with the flu, and this lance corporal stood fire watch for him last night at the armory. And I thought about that for a while because I remember at times young troops coming up and telling me something I'd said to them years before that I'd completely forgotten about. But I'll bet that Lance Corporal to this day remembers when his lieutenant called him out and said, this is what I want out of all of you. Because if you can give examples of it, then you'll prevent some of the bad character from basically coming out in your troops because they know what you're looking for. And most of the troops want to do a good job. I would say all of them do most of the time. And most of them do probably, most of them will live up to your expectations. Let me put it that way. But you've got to reward that behavior. And when you spot bad behavior, hopefully you've had enough examples you can refer to and say, that's what I want to see out of you, no more of this other stuff. And by doing that, you shape them for the challenges that are coming up ahead.
Yes, sir. And so you talked a little bit about this before, but society can look different than what we talked about. We talked at the beginning of the conference or at the beginning of this segment about how, we just do it a little bit differently, and that's why the public trusts us, why, people want to hire us, that type of thing. Some people might say, society's different, and people's character, their moral beliefs are set by the time they're 5 or 6.
Yeah.
As leaders, as members of an organization, how would you say that we pursue character development in those that we lead? I think anybody here at the Naval Academy would know that, just sitting people down for a training, sometimes people can be a little bit apathetic. I think, Colonel McDonough, you can attest to this. People sometimes might be a little bit resistant to some types of things, but, that doesn't mean that you don't develop that character in people. How would you say you effectively go about developing that character?
Well, I think it's a bigger challenge today for junior officers than when I was a junior officer in this regard. Today in our society, we have so many people who seem to evidence a lot of affection for cynicism and for victimhood. And cynicism, this idea, oh, you can't do anything about it anyway, let me tell you, you're going to be in tough spots in the naval service very quickly. And the last thing we need is some junior officer sucking his thumb, being cynical, saying, oh, there's nothing we can do about it anyway. There's always something you can do about it. You're going to learn the only thing you control in life is how you react to what happens to you. And you're defined by how you react to the toughest challenges in your life. That's what defines us. So I think that if you see cynicism and victimhood for what they are, which are simply different words for cowardice, and the naval service will never reinforce cowardice, then right away you know what you don't want to ever do yourself, and you know what you don't want to reward. And I think that as you go forward in the naval service, what you're looking at doing is you're looking at how do you breed the people who can take the shocks in stride. And combat is just one shock after another. That's all it is one shock after another. And you've got to find a way of bringing out the good in them. I don't think there's anything that you're going to face that other graduates of the academy have not faced before. So the more you read in their biographies how they handled those kind of incidents, the more you'll find ways that help you to either handle the incident or prevent the incident from ever occurring that's got you reacting to it. Does that answer your question, or am I missing something there?
No, sir. I think that pretty much hits the nail on the head.
Promote this man right here. Now, the thing is, you've just got to be careful in this area because ethics is so tied into your character and so tied into building trust that you can start talking in circles a bit. But the reason for that is that circle's unbroken, and if you ever break it at some point, then things start falling out. And at that point, that's when you're in naval terms, you're in damage control. And like I'm in damage control right now because David Brooks is speaking next, and that is a terrible thing to follow. Hi, David, my old friend. But my point is that as you go through a naval ethics course, remember in the back of your mind, it's a ship that's just been torpedoed, it's a ship on fire, it's a Marine outpost that's getting overrun, that's the time when the trust factor comes to bear. That's the time when everything else drops off, and now it's whether or not you've got the trust of all hands to reverse the situation. And you will be there one day. You must assume that. I even quote dead commies, but Trotsky said something really interesting. He said, if you're not interested in war, rest assured war is interested in you. And for all of you young mids, believe me, this is why I'm here, is total respect for you. You're going to go in harm's way, and these are the kind of issues you are best off if you've dealt with in your character development, because there's going to come a point where everything's stripped off and your character's left bare, and it's going to be all riding on your young shoulders. So keep using every day here. Consider every week your last week of peace, your last week of getting in top physical shape, of being more mentally prepared, but most of all, being spiritually ready for what's coming.
Yes, sir. And so as people are getting ready, as they're developing themselves and we're pursuing that character development and those that we're leading, how do you establish not only the means of that character development, but creating a culture overall that allows for that character development to take place?
Well, I'd fall back on you get the behavior you reward. So make sure you're rewarding the right behavior, and don't accidentally, through a lack of understanding of what's really going on in your unit, start rewarding people who are giving you a happy to glad, everything's fine, boss, everything's fine, but they're actually hiding things from you. In other words, we're counting on you to get into the 95% of your troops, not the superficial 5%. But I tell you, the society, again, that you're drawing troops from, you've got to recognize this is a society that's going through tough times right now. And we've been through them before. But you know about January 6th. Every one of you has lived through this one. And so you have to recognize that you're going to have troops that need more attention in terms of your senior enlisted talking with them, the junior officers talking with them, in order to make sure you're developing the character that you need out of these folks. Abraham Lincoln, you're not unique in this. Abraham Lincoln comes through his second election. Probably he won that only because General Sherman had taken Atlanta, because the country was fed up in the Civil War with the war. It had gone on too long. Every family in America had lost someone. Everyone was affected. And he realizes that the discontent, the anti-draft riots in New York City, all these things that are happening could be infecting his military. And I've got here, this is a copy from the U.S. Military Telegraph at the War Department, a one-sentence telegram he sends to Lieutenant General Grant at City Point, Virginia. He said, "Let nothing which is transpiring change, hinder, or delay your military movements or plans." If this was Abraham Lincoln writing to you, I think he would say on January 7th, let nothing that has transpired in Washington, D.C. hinder you in your development of your character, of your preparation as a naval officer. You must not let any political bias into your own thinking. Matter of fact, General Grant, years later, after he'd served as president, when asked what was the biggest danger to his officers, he said the biggest danger was developing a political bias. He said nothing is more fatal to a naval or military officer. Now, Ulysses Grant knew something about fatal and what that word meant. And so somehow you have got to be an example of trust in the Constitution, of ensuring that your troops understand what does it mean when I say I swear that I'll support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And how do you bring the better angels to speak to them at a time when every bit of social media or you can listen to a news channel from this left-hand side or this right-hand side trying to teach your troops to hate or distrust half of America. And somehow you've got to live strong the idea that that Constitution is worthy, it's worth defending, and keep true faith and allegiance to the Constitution. And somehow you've got to use that as your foundation. Because if you don't have a foundation like that, as Crosby, Stills, and Nash wrote, you'll never have a code you can live by. because you can't live by the Naval Service Code of Expectations if you don't have a code of conduct for yourself, for your personal moral character that starts with the Constitution of the United States. It doesn't end there, but it starts there. So that's the way I would address it.
Definitely. And you mentioned this briefly, but social media and just how interconnected everybody is now. You know, there are a lot of subcultures that people find, and it can be hard to create a culture within whatever organization, whether there's a company, a brigade, you know, whatever your group might be. You know, it's easier for people to find subcultures that oftentimes they identify with more than whatever the organization is that you're leading. So I think that definitely is a unique challenge that we're facing, that we're seeing in our generation, that previous generations might not have seen as much.
Well, to a degree, I think you're right, Grant, but I would also point out, you know, coming from the, I'll speak from the Marine Corps for a moment, it has no institutional confusion about what it exists for. And the clarity of that allows you as a junior officer, by putting your troops through very rigorous training. And remember the old Confucian idea of body, mind, and spirit. You make certain that they're going through training so hard, so challenging, that they never get complacent. They always know they can improve. And then you make sure they're doing their reading. The Commandant's reading list is there. And if they're doing the reading, they're mentally becoming more cunning than the enemy that you're going to be, as young officers, leading your troops against. But really, you're doing the physical and the mental conditioning to build yourself spiritually. And that spiritual connection to your troops, to the mission, to the Constitution, that gives you the ability to overcome some of these external, I would just call it, values that are contrary to what the Naval Service expects from you. And you are given every opportunity in the military, much more so than any civilian leader has in terms of authority, in terms of influence, that sort of thing. But it comes down to your persuasive force of personality and how much you believe. Because you're going to be, the troops can see through it if you're just mouthing the words and you don't believe it. So you got to live by it too. But I think it is not as difficult for those of you in the Naval Service who sail around the world. You're in your own environment. You reward people for certain things. Again, the institution is building based on your reward system. You can bring people along. It's not that hard. It's just you've got to be aware that if you're going silent over that social media, someone else is pumping in ideas and values that you don't want your troops to live by. So you must constantly be talking about values. That is not something you leave for your 1 hour a month of required training. It's something you hit on at morning formation. It's something you reinforce when troops are looking out for each other. If you have troops looking out for each other, you know, I was talking to President Fox, former president of Mexico, and he said something really interesting to me. He said, there's a lot of roads to happiness. But he said, the only shortcut to happiness lies in serving others. The great good fortune you have as naval officers is that you are expected to serve others. You're expected to serve the Constitution. You're sailors and Marines. That is an expectation. It's one of the reasons why you will develop character in areas that other people at age 45 will be laying on a couch trying to pay a stranger to reinforce, no, you did okay, you did okay. You'll never have to be on that couch, okay? You know you did okay. As John F. Kennedy put it, if you could say you served in the U.S. Navy, you never have to worry about whether or not you did something with your life. So, I mean, don't be intimidated by the social media. You are much more persuasive than social media if you're engaged with the 95% of your troops, not just the superficial 5%.
Yes, sir. And so you were talking about, you know, having that constant dialogue and being able to open that dialogue. I think a big part of that is reading, and everybody's always asking for book recommendations because reading things that other people, other leaders have written can help us to kind of develop our own leadership philosophies and see who we want to be as leaders. So just kind of on that note, if you only had 2 character cultivating books that you could recommend to leaders, what would those 2 be, and why would you recommend those 2?
Well, first, let me just tell you, in regard to what Midshipman Booker just said, I'm going to tell you young folks how to make 4 stars, so take notes, okay? Fight enemy generals dumber than a bucket of rocks, okay? My point is, I remember after 9/11, I was a 1-star, and a fleet commander, 3-star, called me into his office, and he says, the enemy, this is right after we'd been hit, and he said, the enemy is going to lose Mazar-e-Sharif. The CIA and the Green Berets with the Northern Alliance are going to force them out. They're going to fall back on Kabul. Admiral had done his reading. He'd done his history work. He said, no one's held Kabul in 500 years. They're going to Kandahar. And then he asked me, can you get the Marines together from the Pacific Fleet and the Mediterranean Fleet and go 350 nautical miles in, move against Kandahar, and, quote, raise hell? I said, yes, sir, I can do that. He said, okay. He said, what do you need? And I said, I need an airplane to go look at Afghanistan for a little while. He gave me a P-3, and I go up with those beautiful telescopes on that bird and everything. We flew over the north, and I could see, that the fighting up there and all. And over on the east side, over near the Pakistan border, you see the fighting there. Then I saw this big dark area south of Kandahar. And as clearly as I can see you, thanks to my reading, I did not care. I did not care a bit how many troops he had, how many tanks he had, and how many mortars he had. I knew I was going to stick a knife in his back, and there was not a thing he was going to be able to do about it. It was that clear to me because I'd done my reading. So I cannot overemphasize doing the reading. And the 2 books in this area that I would strongly recommend, one is one I carried. I wore out more of them carrying in my rucksack by Marcus Aurelius. It's Meditations. And it's one that, for example, I would read before every meeting I went to or testimony I went to in Washington, D.C., because it kept me from going physical with some people I wanted to pop in the mouth, It taught me just calm down, that you work with them and this sort of thing, because I wasn't there to create adversarial relationships or antagonisms. But it shows that you face nothing new under the sun, and it teaches you humility. Notice which word is printed in red up on that slide behind me. And there's a reason for that. You've got to stay humble as a leader. It's how I got my call sign Chaos, because my irreverent troops did not think I was as brilliant as I thought I was. And when I was a colonel, they had Chaos written on their whiteboard and wouldn't tell me what it meant. So I beat them up. And I got it out of them, and it meant Colonel has another outstanding suggestion. And I kept that as my call sign as a reminder that maybe not all my ideas were as brilliant as I thought they were. But there's a young Texan down south, down there, and they're all a little weird anyway from Texas, His name is Ryan Holiday, and he has written a book called The Obstacle is the Way. And if I was right now here, I would probably start with Ryan Holiday's book, The Obstacle is the Way, follow up with Marcus Aurelius, and I would read anything David Brooks has ever written. It remains a guiding light for me. I just tell you, in every column he's ever written, even though some of them are wooing his wife at long distance, believe it or not. That's no kidding, by the way. Maybe he'll tell you about it.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. I'll have to get with you after this, sir, and talk to you about some of your writings. But, sir, you also have a book called Call Sign Chaos. Discuss a little bit about how you got the call sign. I saw you signing a couple of copies of the book out there at the breakfast area. I'm sure a number of midshipmen have read it, a number of officers as well, and the faculty and staff here. In that book, you said that your Marines had to learn the ability to do harsh things, yet not lose their humanity. I think right now that's pretty timely for us. We're in a heightened sense of tension right now with what's going on with China and Russia, and we may find ourselves very soon in some situations where we need to do harsh things, but not lose our humanity. So how would you say that ability is cultivated, and how can we really focus on shaping that as we face those situations, sir?
Well, first of all, keep faith in yourself. You can do this. Many Americans have carried the Patriots' burden, gone off to war. General Sherman, just over here in Washington, bidding farewell to his Army of the West, that had really done more than anyone else in terms of destroying the Confederate Army and the will to fight to continue the rebellion. When he sent his troops home, he said, as you've been good soldiers, you will also be good citizens. So number one, just expect that you're going to stay good in all this. That expectation will help you. I remember once I had a reporter come up, a European reporter, and she confessed right up front that she had come in with a real bias against our troops in Iraq. And she had to tell me something. She'd requested through 3 different chains to see me, and I finally said, well, I better see her. I tried to avoid reporters for while I was over there. And she comes in to see me, and I thought she was going to say, I saw your Marines do this, and it was very bad. So I'm prepared for that. This is why you ought to keep your bias out of your thinking as an officer, by the way. And she said that she'd been covering Marines and she named the town where we'd had some problems. And she said she was there interviewing some people, and the Marines came basically down the street, and they'd been fired on, so she wanted to interview people about it. And the Marines were fighting very close by. And one Marine was not 50 feet from her, watching down an alley, and there was a mother with a little child, little boy, next to her holding hands, and they were up against the wall just petrified as this fighting was going on. And she suddenly saw the Marine come up, and a guy came running down the alley, turned around to shoot at Marines who were chasing him, and the Marine put 2 shots at him, dropped him, and some NCO and some Marines came running up, and they kicked the rifle away, she said, from the guy, checked he is dead, and basically said, good shooting, and the Marine said, there are more over on the other building. They took off. And the young Marine continued to stand there watching in the alley. And the woman and the little boy just frozen there. And finally, the Marines came back out and they were walking off. And the Marine walked over and gave the little kid candy. There's something about kids everywhere in the world. They know how to unwrap candy and put it in their mouth. It's inherent. It's in children's DNA. And he gave the candy to the kid. And as she said, she watched the couple walk off, the mother and the little boy, and the little boy kept around waving to the Marine, who waved back. Now there's a guy, it's not an insignificant moment the first time you draw down on your fellow man and shoot them. Let's be right up front, that's an ugly thing. And yet that Marine, even at the time he was doing it, was able to give a piece of candy to the kid, and the kid is going to remember probably more about that candy and waving to the Marine than the trauma of what happened, for example, in one of our schools here recently where we had, people getting killed and all. So my point to you is that you should never believe that because you've done something like that, that you can't be a good person. The troops came home from the Battle of the Bulge and Iwo Jima from Midway, from Guadalcanal, and they became, college students and college presidents. They started businesses, they raised good families. So we've got this idea now that, that everything about the military service is traumatic. No, it isn't. Is this off the record?
There is some record, I think, of this. I think
Okay, I'll leave some things out.
Just to give you a heads up, I think they are recording some of this.
But my point to you is, don't ever fall back into this idea that once you've had to do some grim things to protect this country, we need you to do that. If you can't do that, we're in deep trouble. You take a look at the storm clouds gathering. We need young people who can conduct violence and come home and lead good lives, and you can do it. We have generations of Americans as role models for you. So don't worry about this. You'll be okay. You'll make your own separate peace with it in your own way, and you'll get through it, and you'll have a bright future even after you come out of it.
Yes, sir. Sir, thank you so much. This has been an absolute honor for me.
Okay, you have time for one C story?
I think so, sir. We get on perfect.
We
Yes,
do.
sir.
We're at a time right now, my fine young midshipmen, when a lot of people are questioning the goodness of America. We've got people who teach the history of America in a way that leaves out all the good stuff. I remember I was sitting there as a Supreme Allied Commander for NATO, and I'm meeting with the ambassador from Australia. And he said, America made the single most self-sacrificial pledge in world history after World War II. And I'm looking across just 2 of us at lunch in his backyard, and I'm thinking, I I got to know as much history about America as this Australian dude. And so I'm looking at it, and I said, United Nations. We set up the United Nations. He said, no, that wasn't self-sacrifice. That was your greatest generation wanted to, they'd beaten fascism. They wanted to make sure there was a way to discuss problems. So I'm thinking, I said, Bretton Woods, 1 and 2, you know, the IMF and World Bank, as you and I call it, lenders of last resort. So when people are losing hope, they have a lender they can go to. They don't have to turn to a Mussolini. They can go here and get enough money to start creating wealth in their country. And he said, no. He said that was just a reminder that the Great Depression that had shaped them, that led to the war, had to be prevented. I'm starting to run out there. I said, it's the Marshall Plan, where we went to our former enemies and we helped them. I mean, think of this, 3 years after what the Nazis had done, and we're helping them put their economy back on their feet. He said, no. He said, that's just how unique America is, a victor. Boy, I'm really running out. And he said, no. He said, it was NATO. I said, what do you mean, NATO? He said, you recalled the most trusted general in the world, Eisenhower, from Columbia University. He said, put your uniform back on, stand up NATO. We're going to help protect democracy in Western Europe, and we're going to pledge 100 million dead Americans in a nuclear war, if necessary, to protect democracy. Isn't it strange that it took a foreigner to teach me that about America? I'd never put it together like that. Never been taught that. Well, I've also learned about America from enemies. And I was a 2-star general in the summer of 2004, and it is a terrible time. We've gone into Iraq. We've been recalled to Iraq after only 60 days gone, taken over from 82nd Airborne Division, a place called Al Anbar. It's a Sunni triangle. Some of you remember names like Fallujah, Ramadi, Haditha. I'm losing people every day. It's the size of North Carolina, and I've got fewer sailors and Marines than North Carolina has police officers. And it's a tough time. Matter of fact, of the 29 sailors and Marines who drive me around that battlefield day after day, 17 of those 29 would be killed or wounded around me in 4 months. And I'm a 2-star general. I'm not in the tough fighting. So we get to an outpost. I'm going out near Syrian border because the foreign fighters are coming in through Syria. And if the Marine outpost line doesn't catch them, and it was very hard to catch them, they're going to get to Baghdad. They're going to kill American soldiers. They're going to kill innocent Iraqis. So I pull into an outpost one night. It's about midnight because we had trouble getting there, fighting as usual. And when the sun comes up, the lieutenant who's got the platoon out in the middle of nowhere, dug in holes. We're living through 120 plus degree heat out there in that humid area. And he comes over to brief me, and we're going over where is he fighting, how is he staying connected to the other outposts and that sort of thing. Where's he killing enemy at? Usual stuff. And he says, we caught a guy laying an IED on the road you came in on last night. Well, that's kind of personal, And he said he'd been 2 years in London, and he was getting engineering school there. He speaks English. You want to talk to him? I said, sure. So the lieutenant got done, briefed me a little bit, and walks off. Pretty soon a Marine comes over with a rifle on the back of a guy, sits him down and cuts his little plastic handcuffs off. And I could tell he was Sunni. I'd spent a lot of years in the Middle East. And I said, why are you trying to kill us? We're the Marines. We're the only friends you got out here. Why are you trying to kill us? And he goes after me. He says, oh, you Jews, you Americans, you're here to steal the oil. And I said, actually, we're not. I don't even want to be in your country, but I pull my wallet out every time I pump gas. So you're an educated man, just go away. I'm not going to waste my time talking to you. And the Marine stepped forward to take him away, and he said, can I sit here for a minute? I said, okay. And after a couple minutes, he said, I just don't like having foreign troops in my country. Man to man, I understand that. I wouldn't want them in my country. So we talked some more. He and his family had been forced out of Baghdad by the Civil War. He was renting a house about 15 kilometers away on a river, had a wife and 2 daughters. And he asked, am I going to jail? I said, oh, yeah. You're going to be wearing an orange jumpsuit in Abu Ghraib for a good long time for this stunt. You're lucky you're not dead. You know, it hadn't been a good night for him. He has his wheelbarrow, 2 artillery rounds, his car battery, digging a hole, and looks up, and there's 5 guys with automatic weapons pointed at him. He knew his retirement plan was in jeopardy right there. But the sun's getting up there. It's time. I got to get moving on to the next outpost. And he says, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." I want you to listen to this, my fine young mids, because on the day that you've watched the wrong, I will call it the wrong TV station, whichever far left or far right station it is, and you're coming to dislike your own country, or you've been trained with every bad thing America ever did in its history and forgotten a lot of the good, you can get frustrated at times about our country. And I love sailors and Marines. I stuck around. I'm an unabashed admirer of all of you, every single one of you who volunteered for this. But it's one of our fundamental sources of power, our military and CIA, and we need them in this world. But there's a stronger source of power for America, and that's our power of inspiration. Because his question was, do you think, General, if I'm a model prisoner, that my family and I can immigrate to America someday? Now stop and think of that. He is literally trying to kill us, but the power of America's inspiration can reach halfway around the world to the western Euphrates River Valley and hit him in the heart. And I bring this up because on our worst day, whatever day, your worst day you've ever had looking at your country, maybe it's January 6th, maybe it's something else sticking in your craw, you just remember he would give anything to be living right here in Annapolis and his 2 daughters going to school out here in town. So you keep the faith, my fine young midshipmen. We're going to get through this, and you're part of the reason we're going to get through. You're going to protect this experiment. You're going to keep faith in it. And when you get out of the Naval Service in 5 years or 45 years or whatever it is, you're going to be a stronger person in your community, in your school district. You're going to bring all these values, all this character, this moral character to bear. And we are going to remain the one shining hope in this world, that even at that point in time when someone's fighting us, he still recognized we are still the best going. So Godspeed to you all, and if you go into the fight, I wish you good hunting. All the best.
Thank you so much, sir. That's fantastic.
Thanks for
This is
running
such a
the
treat for
meeting.
me. I really do.
I tell you, Grant, you made it a conversation. Thank you. Thanks very much. Guess we better get off here.
Greetings, everybody. Thanks, and we're going to have a break until 10:10.